The mission begins. The small, dimly lit room smelled of metal and grease. Captain Jax leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression a mix of boredom and annoyance. He hated waiting, especially when he didn't know what for. The old man in front of him, dressed in a stiff military uniform, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Captain Jax," the man began, his voice cold and formal. "You've been assigned a critical mission." Jax smirked. "Critical? Sounds important. Why me?" The old man didn't smile. "Because you're good at what you do, and because no one else wanted the job." Jax raised an eyebrow, but stayed quiet. He wasn't new to dangerous missions, smuggling cargo through pirate-infested space, evading enemy ships, and escaping impossible situations. Those were his specialties. But something about the old man's tone made him uneasy. "Your task," the old man continued, "is to transport a passenger to the High Council on Nova Prime. The details are classified, but you must ensure her safety. No excuses." "Her?" Jax asked, his smirk widening. This just got interesting. The old man ignored him and handed over a datapad. "You leave immediately. The passenger is waiting in Dock 9. Good luck, Captain." Jax took the pad, glanced at the minimal information, and shrugged. "Piece of cake," he said, but as he walked out of the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just another job. At Dock 9, Jax approached his ship, the Starhawk, a small but sturdy freighter that had seen better days. The ship's hull was scarred from countless battles, and the engines groaned like an old man waking up. Jax loved it anyway. Standing near the boarding ramp was the passenger. She was tall and graceful, with silver skin that shimmered under the lights. Her large, almond-shaped eyes glowed faintly blue, and her long, dark hair flowed like liquid shadow. She looked regal, untouchable, and completely annoyed. "You must be the human," she said, her voice sharp and cold. Jax stopped in his tracks, taken aback by her hostility. "Nice to meet you too," he replied, forcing a grin. Her eyes narrowed. "I didn't ask to meet you. I don't trust humans." Jax's grin faded. "Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Because you're stuck with me." She crossed her arms and looked him up and down. "I've read about your kind. Selfish, violent, reckless. This mission is doomed before it starts." Jax rolled his eyes. "Lady, I'm just here to fly the ship. You can hate me all you want, but you're getting to Nova Prime alive. That's my job." She didn't reply. Instead, she walked past him and into the ship without another word. Jax muttered to himself, "Great. This is going to be fun." The cockpit of the Starhawk was small but functional. Jax slid into the pilot's seat, running his hands over the controls like a musician preparing to play. The ship hummed to life, and the engines roared. The alien girl, he still didn't know her name, sat silently in the co-pilot's chair. She stared out the viewport, her expression unreadable. Jax tried to break the tension. "So," he said casually, "do I call you Your Highness, or do you have a name?" She didn't look at him. "Lyra," she said flatly. "Well, Lyra," Jax said, leaning back, "you might want to strap in. My flying can get exciting." "I don't need your warnings," she snapped. "Just do your job." Jax sighed and muttered, "Why do I always get the pleasant ones?" As the ship lifted off, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. He glanced at the scanners. Nothing unusual. Still, his instincts told him trouble was near. Minutes later, the ship cleared the atmosphere and entered the vast emptiness of space. Stars glittered like diamonds against the black canvas. Lyra still hadn't spoken, and the silence was starting to annoy Jax. "So," he said, trying again, "why do you hate humans so much? Did one of us steal your lunch money or something?" Lyra shot him a glare. "Humans are destroyers. Your kind invades, takes, and leaves nothing but ruin. My people have suffered because of you." Jax frowned. He wanted to argue, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Instead, he said, "Not all humans are like that." "Prove it," she replied coldly. Before Jax could respond, the ship's alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the control panel. "What the?" Jax said, his hands flying over the controls. "We've got company." Lyra leaned forward, her expression finally showing concern. "Who is it?" Jax studied the scanner. "Unmarked ships. No ID. They're coming in fast." Lyra's eyes widened. "They found me." "Found you?" Jax snapped. "What did you bring on my ship?" "No time to explain." Lyra shouted, "Just get us out of here." Jax didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the engines to full throttle, the Starhawk roaring as it dodged incoming fire. Explosions lit up the darkness, shaking the ship violently. "Hang on," Jax shouted as he pulled the ship into a steep dive, weaving through the debris field of a long-forgotten battle. The enemy ships stayed on their tail, firing relentlessly. Lyra gripped the armrests of her seat, her earlier confidence replaced by fear. Jax glanced at her and smirked. "Not so easy to hate me now, huh?" "Just fly," she yelled. Jax laughed, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He didn't know why these ships were after Lyra, but one thing was clear: this mission was far from ordinary. And it was only the beginning. The chase. The Starhawk twisted and turned through the blackness of space, its engines roaring louder than they ever had. Captain Jax gritted his teeth, hands steady on the controls. Behind them, 3 sleek, black ships closed in, their weapons firing in bursts of deadly red light. "Who are they?" Jax shouted over the blaring alarms. Lyra, strapped tightly into her seat, didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted between the viewport and the scanner. Finally, she muttered, "They're hunters, and they're here for me." Jax sparked a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Of course they are. Why wouldn't I be stuck in a life-or-death chase because of you?" A missile streaked past the Starhawk, narrowly missing the ship's left wing. The explosion sent shockwaves rattling through the cabin, and Lyra grabbed the armrests of her seat, her composure cracking. "Less talking, more flying," she snapped. Jax grinned despite himself. "You know, for someone who hates humans, you sure love giving orders like one." Ignoring her glare, he yanked the ship into a sharp roll, narrowly dodging another volley of lasers. His fingers danced across the controls, activating the Starhawk's limited arsenal. The rear turrets fired back, but the enemy ships were too fast, their sleek forms darting like predators playing with their prey. Lyra finally broke the silence. "They won't stop," she said, her voice tight with fear. "They'll keep coming until one of us is dead." Jax glanced at her, still annoyed but curious. "Mind telling me why they're so interested in you? Or do I have to guess?" She hesitated, her jaw tightening. "It's better if you don't know." Jax slammed a fist on the console, frustration bubbling over. "Wrong answer, princess. These guys are about to turn us into space dust, and I'm risking my neck for you. I deserve to know." Before Lyra could reply, the cockpit shuddered violently. A warning light blinked on the console, and Jax cursed under his breath. "Shields are down to 30%, he muttered. Lyra paled. "Can't this scrap heap go any faster?" Jax shot her a look. "Scrap heap? Lady, this scrap heap is the only reason you're not floating in space right now." As if in response to her insult, the Starhawk groaned loudly, its aging engines struggling to keep up. Jax grinned and muttered under his breath, "Don't listen to her, Beatty. You're doing great." Suddenly, the scanner beeped, drawing Jax's attention. Up ahead was a dense asteroid field, its massive rocks tumbling in slow, deadly dances. It wasn't a safe option, but it was the only option. "Hold on to something," Jax warned, his voice calm but firm. Lyra's eyes widened. "You're not serious. You can't fly through that." "Watch me," Jax replied, gripping the controls tightly. The Starhawk dove into the asteroid field, the black ships right on its tail. Massive chunks of rock loomed ahead, some spinning unpredictably, others smashing into each other with terrifying force. Jax navigated through the chaos with precision, his movements sharp and calculated. One of the enemy ships wasn't so lucky. It clipped an asteroid, spinning wildly before exploding in a fiery burst. "Ha! One down," Jax said, grinning. Lyra wasn't smiling. "There are still two more." "Yeah, I noticed," Jax replied, sweat dripping down his forehead. The remaining ships pressed on, their weapons still firing. The Starhawk's hull groaned under the strain, warning lights flashing like angry eyes. Jax clenched his jaw and pushed the ship harder, weaving through the labyrinth of rocks. Lyra, for once, stayed quiet, her hands gripping the seat tightly. She couldn't deny it anymore. Jax was good. Better than she'd expected from a human. Just when it seemed like they might escape, one of the enemy ships fired a well-placed shot. The blast grazed the Starhawk's engines, sending the ship spinning out of control. "Damn it," Jax shouted, wrestling with the controls. Lyra's voice was sharp. "What's happening?" "Engines are hit. We're losing power," Jax growled. The Starhawk careened toward a massive asteroid, its rocky surface growing larger by the second. "Do something," Lyra shouted. Jax shot her a look. "You think I'm not trying?" With a final surge of effort, he managed to stabilize the ship, steering it toward a narrow crevice in the asteroid. "Hold your breath," he muttered. The Starhawk slipped into the crevice, its hull scraping against the jagged walls. Sparks flew, and the entire ship shook violently. But somehow, they made it through, emerging on the other side into a small, hidden pocket of space. The enemy ships hesitated, scanning the area. They circled the asteroid field but didn't follow, unwilling to risk the dangerous terrain. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He slumped back in his seat, exhausted but triumphant. "Well," he said, turning to Lyra, "looks like we're not dead. You're welcome." Lyra, still pale from the ordeal, managed to glare at him. "This isn't over," she said. "They'll come back." Jax raised an eyebrow. "They always do. But next time, maybe you'll tell me what I'm up against before they start shooting." Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, staring out at the asteroid field. Jax watched her for a moment, his earlier anger fading into curiosity. Who was she? And why was she so important? One thing was certain, this mission was more dangerous than he'd bargained for. But for some reason, Jax couldn't bring himself to regret taking it. For now, though, they were alive. And in space, that was victory enough. Lyra's secret. The Starhawk drifted in the hidden pocket of space, engines cooling down, and silence thick in the air. The faint hum of life support was the only sound, but it didn't mask the tension filling the cockpit. Jax leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, trying to make sense of the last hour. "You've got some explaining to do," he said, breaking the silence. Lyra, still seated in the co-pilot's chair, didn't respond immediately. Her face was unreadable, her glowing blue eyes fixed on the black void beyond the viewport. "I mean it, Princess," Jax pressed, his voice firmer now. "You drag me into this mess. Hunters start shooting at my ship, and I don't even know why. Spill it." She turned to him slowly, her expression cold but tinged with something else. Hesitation. Fear. "It's not your concern," she said finally, her tone sharp. Jax laughed bitterly, standing up and pacing the small cockpit. "Not my concern. Lady, they weren't firing at you. They were firing at us. So yeah, I think it's my concern." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Jax stopped pacing and leaned on the console, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You don't tell me what's going on, and I'll turn this ship around. Let them deal with you. You're not worth dying for." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Then she stood, her silver skin catching the dim light of the cockpit. "They're after me," she said quietly, "because I'm the last of my kind." Jax blinked, caught off guard. "The last of your kind? What does that even mean?" Lyra crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "My planet, Clindra, was destroyed. My people wiped out. I am the sole survivor." The weight of her words settled in the room, heavy and unyielding. Jax stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. Destroyed? By who? She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. By humans. Jax's stomach twisted. He'd heard stories. Planets caught in the crossfire of human wars, entire species displaced or destroyed. But hearing it from someone who'd lived through it was different. "Not all humans," Jax said defensively. "No," Lyra agreed, her voice bitter. "Just enough to end a civilization." Jax sat back down, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to argue, to say it wasn't his fault, but something about the pain in her voice stopped him. Instead, he asked, "So what do the hunters want? Why chase you if your planet's already gone?" Lyra looked away, her arms tightening around herself. "Because I am the last heir to the Clindran throne. If I die, so does my people's claim to anything. Land, resources, history, it all becomes theirs." "Theirs?" Jax asked, leaning forward. "The Syndicate," she spat, her eyes blazing with anger. "They want to erase us entirely. With me gone, there will be no one to speak for Clindra, no one to fight for justice." Jax whistled low. "So your royalty explains the attitude." Lyra glared at him. "This isn't a joke, human." Jax held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, princess. I'm just trying to keep things light. It's not every day I find out I'm babysitting alien royalty on the run from intergalactic hitmen." Lyra sighed and sat back down, her posture tense. "I need to get to the High Council on Nova Prime. They're the only ones with the power to stop the Syndicate. If I can present my case, they might help." "Might," Jax repeated, frowning. She hesitated. "The Syndicate is powerful. They've bought many council members. But it's my only chance." Jax leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the cockpit. He hated politics, hated being dragged into things bigger than himself. But there was something about Lyra's determination that struck a chord in him. "And what happens if we don't make it?" he asked quietly. Lyra didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then Clindra will be forgotten forever." The weight of her words settled over Jax like a heavy blanket. He sat in silence, processing everything she'd said. Then, without looking at her, he muttered, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Lyra looked down, her expression softening. "Because I didn't trust you. Humans destroyed my world. Why should I believe one of you would care about saving it?" Jax turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Trust me or don't. But if you want to live, you're going to have to rely on me. You think you can make it to Nova Prime on your own?" Lyra met his gaze, her pride and mistrust warring with the harsh reality of her situation. Finally, she nodded. "Good," Jax said, turning back to the controls. "Because those hunters aren't done with us. And next time, they'll bring backup." Lyra's expression hardened. "Then we'll be ready." Jax glanced at her and smirked. "You've got guts, princess. I'll give you that." As he powered up the Starhawk's engines, a faint beep on the scanner caught his attention. His smirk faded, replaced by a grim determination. "Speaking of hunters," he said, pointing at the screen, "looks like they found us." Lyra tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her side. "How many?" "2 ships," Jax said, his voice calm but serious. "Small, fast, heavily armed. Typical Syndicate style." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Can we outrun them?" Jax grinned. "We don't need to outrun them. We just need to outsmart them." The Starhawk roared to life, and the chase began again. The betrayal. The Starhawk sliced through the vastness of space, the 2 Syndicate ships in relentless pursuit, Jax's fingers flew across the controls as he pushed his ship harder than he ever had before. The engines screamed in protest, but they held together, barely. "Any bright ideas, Princess?" Jax asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Lyra sat rigid in her seat, her eyes fixed on the scanner. "I thought you said you were the expert pilot." "Expert pilot, yes. Miracle worker, not so much," Jax quipped, narrowly dodging another barrage of laser fire. The cockpit shuddered violently as a blast clipped the Starhawk's shields. Warning lights flared across the console. "We won't survive another hit like that," Lyra said, her voice tense. Jax growled under his breath. He scanned the space ahead, searching for anything that could tip the odds in their favor. That's when he saw it, a faint signal blinking on the nav screen. "There," Jax said, pointing. "A distress beacon. It's coming from a nearby ship. Could be friendly." Lyra's eyes narrowed. Or it could be a trap. "Either way," Jax replied, steering toward the signal. "It's better than being space dust." As they approached the source of the beacon, a medium-sized vessel came into view. Its hull was painted in the colors of the Galactic Alliance, a faction known for its neutrality. The ship's docking lights blinked, signaling them to approach. Jax opened the comms channel. "This is Captain Jax of the Starhawk. We're under attack and need assistance." A smooth, reassuring voice replied. "Captain Jax, this is Commander Wren of the Alliance Frigate Valor. You're clear to dock. We'll handle your pursuers." Jax exhaled in relief. "You hear that, Lyra? Looks like we've got a lucky break." Lyra didn't share his enthusiasm. She eyed the frigate suspiciously, her fingers twitching near the dagger on her belt. "I don't trust them." "Well, trust me," Jax said, guiding the Starhawk into the frigate's docking bay. "If they wanted us dead, they'd have let those syndicate ships finish the job." The docking bay doors hissed open, and Jax stepped out, his blaster holstered but ready. Lyra followed close behind, her movements cautious and fluid. A group of uniformed soldiers waited for them, their weapons lowered but their postures alert. Commander Wren emerged from the group, a tall, polished man with an air of authority. His silver hair and sharp features gave him the look of someone who was used to being obeyed. "Captain Jax," Wren said, extending a hand. "You're safe now." Jax shook the man's hand, though he couldn't help noticing the calculating look in Wren's eyes. "Appreciate the assist, Commander." Those syndicate ships weren't exactly in the mood for conversation. Wren smiled thinly. "The syndicate rarely is. And who might this be?" His gaze shifted to Lyra. "She's," Jax began, but Lyra interrupted. "None of your business," she said coldly, her chin lifted defiantly. Wren's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. "Fair enough. Let's get you to the briefing room. We'll discuss how to proceed from here." The briefing room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the chase. It was clean, bright, and eerily quiet. Jax and Lyra sat across from Wren at a long table, the commander's soldiers standing guard at the door. "So," Wren began, leaning back in his chair, "you're running from the syndicate. Care to tell me why?" Jax glanced at Lyra, who remained silent. He sighed. "Let's just say they don't like her much. Something about being the last heir to a planet they destroyed." Wren raised an eyebrow, his smile returning. "Ah, so you're the famous Lyra of Clindra. I've heard the stories." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "And yet, here I am, alive. Funny how stories don't always end the way people expect." Wren chuckled. "Indeed." Before he could say more, the room's intercom crackled to life. A soldier's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Commander, syndicate ships have returned. They're demanding we hand over the fugitives." Wren stood, smoothing his uniform. "Excuse me. I'll handle this." As he left the room, Jax leaned closer to Lyra. "See, told you we'd be fine." Lyra didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the door, Rin had just exited. Something about him felt off. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Then the door opened, and Rin re-entered, his expression calm. "Well," he said, "it seems your journey ends here." Jax frowned. "What do you mean?" Rin gestured to his guards, who raised their weapons. "The Syndicate has offered a generous sum for your capture. I'd be a fool to turn it down." Lyra shot to her feet, her dagger drawn. "I knew it. You're no better than they are." Rin smirked. "Spare me the moral outrage, Princess. This is just business." Jax's hand moved to his blaster, but the guards were faster, aiming their rifles directly at him. "Careful, Captain," Rin said. "I'd hate to damage the merchandise." As the guards approached, Jax caught Lyra's eye and gave her the faintest nod. She understood immediately. In one fluid motion, Lyra lunged at the nearest guard, her dagger flashing. The man cried out as she disarmed him, spinning his rifle around and firing at another guard. Jax took advantage of the chaos, drawing his blaster and diving behind the table. Shots rang out, sparks flying as lasers hit the walls and furniture. Rin ducked behind a console, shouting orders. "Don't let them escape." But Jax and Lyra were already moving, fighting their way to the door. Lyra's movements were precise and deadly, while Jax relied on sheer luck and quick reflexes. "Remind me never to doubt you again," Jax muttered as they slipped into the corridor. Lyra smirked. "Told you I didn't trust them." As alarms blared and soldiers closed in, Jax grinned despite the danger. "You know, Princess, you're starting to grow on me." "Don't get used to it," Lyra shot back, leading the way toward the docking bay. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough. The escape plan. The alarms blared through the corridors of the Alliance frigate as Jax and Lyra sprinted toward the docking bay. Red lights pulsed along the walls, casting sharp shadows that made the narrow passageways feel even more claustrophobic. Soldiers shouted in the distance, their boots pounding against the metal floor. "Any brilliant ideas?" Jax panted as he rounded a corner, narrowly dodging a burst of laser fire. Lyra, her silver skin shimmering with sweat, didn't slow down. "Keep running. Fight later." "Great plan," Jax muttered, firing a few shots over his shoulder to slow down their pursuers. "Real tactical genius you are." The docking bay doors loomed ahead, but as they approached, a squad of heavily armed soldiers blocked the entrance. They raised their rifles in unison, their leader shouting, "Halt, or we'll open fire." Jax skidded to a stop, grabbing Lyra's arm. "All right, Princess, this is the part where we don't run." "Ideas?" Lyra glanced at the soldiers, then at the ceiling above the docking bay doors. A faint smirk crossed her face. "Cover me." "Cover you," Jax said, incredulous. "You're going to." But before he could finish, Lyra leaped onto a nearby maintenance ladder, climbing with an agility that left Jax stunned. She reached the ceiling and grabbed a loose power cable, yanking it free with a spark of energy. "What are you?" Jax started, but the lights in the docking bay flickered and died before he could finish. The sudden darkness was absolute, and the soldiers cursed as they scrambled to activate their visor lights. "Now," Lyra hissed from above. Jax didn't hesitate. In the confusion, he fired at a control panel near the soldiers, causing a shower of sparks to rain down on them. Their disarray gave him just enough time to sprint toward the docking bay doors, Lyra dropping down beside him mid-run. The doors hissed open, revealing the Starhawk sitting in the bay like a beacon of hope. Jax could have kissed the battered old ship. Instead, he shouted, "Move, move, move." As they sprinted up the ramp, Jax slammed his hand against the emergency lock. The ramp sealed just as the soldiers regained their composure and opened fire. Laser bolts ricocheted harmlessly off the Starhawk's reinforced plating. "Engines hot?" Lyra asked, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. "Always," Jax replied, flipping switches and pressing buttons at lightning speed. The ship roared to life, its engines glowing with barely restrained energy. He glanced at the viewport and saw the frigate's main hangar doors still close. "Ah, small problem," Jack said, gesturing toward the sealed exit. Lyra smirked, holding up a small device she'd snagged from the frigate. "I took this from their commander." Jax's eyebrows shot up. "What is that?" "Override key," Lyra replied, pressing a button. The massive hangar doors groaned and began to open, revealing the endless void of space beyond. Jax laughed. "You're full of surprises." "You have no idea," Lyra said, her tone dry. As the Starhawk lifted off the docking bay floor, the frigate's automated defenses came online. Turrets swiveled toward the ship, and a voice over the intercom announced, "Unauthorized departure. Terminate immediately." "Turrets? Really?" Jax groaned, gripping the controls. "They couldn't just let us leave." The Starhawk shot forward as the turrets unleashed a barrage of laser fire. Jax twisted and turned the ship, dodging shots with the skill of someone who had spent far too much time in dangerous situations. The ship jolted as a blast grazed its rear shields. "Any time you want to take out those turrets would be great," Jax shouted. Lyra scanned the weapons console. "Do you have anything useful on this bucket of bolts?" "Try the missile system," Jax yelled. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, and a pair of missiles launched from the Starhawk, streaking toward the nearest turret. The explosion lit up the docking bay, and Jax whooped. "Nice shot. Thank me later," Lyra said, firing again to take out the second turret. With the defenses neutralized, Jax accelerated toward the open hangar doors. The Starhawk streaked into open space, but the danger wasn't over yet. The Syndicate ships, still lurking nearby, moved to intercept. Jax cursed under his breath as the Syndicate ships closed in. They were smaller, faster, and more heavily armed than the Starhawk. "Great. We're out of the frying pan and into the fire." Lyra's expression remained calm, her eyes scanning the scanner. "They'll try to flank us. Head for the debris field." Jax glanced at her, surprised. "Debris field? That's suicide." "Not if you're good enough," Lyra said, a faint challenge in her voice. Jax grinned despite the situation. "You're starting to sound like me." The Starhawk dove into the debris field, a chaotic maze of shattered ships and floating wreckage from some long-forgotten battle. The Syndicate ships followed, their pilots confident in their superior speed and firepower. But Jax had the advantage of experience. He weaved through the debris with an almost reckless precision, forcing the Syndicate ships to slow down to avoid collisions. One of the enemy ships wasn't quick enough and clipped a large piece of wreckage. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the field. "Scratch one," Jax muttered, his grin widening. The remaining ship pressed on, its pilot clearly more skilled. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "He's not giving up." "Neither am I," Jax said, pulling the Starhawk into a tight loop. As the Syndicate ship followed, Lyra fired the ship's rear turret, landing a direct hit on its engine. The enemy ship spiraled out of control before detonating in a fiery burst. Jax let out a deep breath. "Well, that was fun." Lyra leaned back in her seat, a rare smile playing at her lips. "You might actually be useful, human." "Careful, princess," Jax said, smirking. "Keep talking like that, and I might start to like you." Lyra didn't reply, but the tension between them seemed to ease slightly. For now, they had escaped, but both of them knew the Syndicate wouldn't stop. The real fight was still ahead. The hidden enemy. The Starhawk drifted quietly through the safety of a nebula, its engines powered down to avoid detection. Swirling clouds of gas and faintly glowing dust provided cover, but the tension inside the cockpit was far from calm. Jax slouched in his chair, feet propped up on the console, while Lyra methodically checked the ship's systems. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the occasional beep of the scanner. Finally, Jax couldn't take it anymore. "All right, Princess, we've shaken off the syndicate. For now, care to explain how they keep finding us? Because I'm starting to think you've got a tracking beacon shoved somewhere unpleasant." Lyra shot him a sharp look, but her usual retort didn't come. Instead, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "It's not a beacon," she said quietly. Jax sat up straight, instantly on alert. "Then what is it?" Lyra sighed, her silver skin seeming to dim slightly under the ship's dim lights. "Someone's feeding them our location. A traitor." Jax blinked, stunned. "A traitor? On your side?" Lyra nodded, her jaw tight. "It has to be. No tracking system is that precise, and we've been careful, until now." Jax leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Great, just great. So not only do we have the syndicate trying to kill us, but we've also got someone on your side pulling the strings. And you didn't think to mention this earlier." Lyra's voice rose, frustration breaking through her usual calm. "Do you think I wanted this? That I chose to have someone betray me? I've lost everything. My home, my people, and now I have to look over my shoulder every second." Jax held up his hands. All right. Calm down. I get it. But if we're going to make it to Nova Prime alive, we need to figure out who this mole is. And fast." The Starhawk's cramped mess hall felt even smaller as Jax and Lyra pored over her datapad. It contained everything she knew about her remaining allies, each name accompanied by a small holo image. "Who's this guy?" Jax asked, pointing to a stern-looking Klindran male with a scar running down his cheek. "Commander Oris," Lyra said. "He was my father's most loyal general. He's been working to rally what's left of our forces." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a stand-up guy. But scars like that usually come with skeletons in the closet." Lyra's gaze hardened. "Oris would never betray me. He was there when the syndicate attacked our capital. He saved my life." Jax shrugged. "All right, we'll put him on the probably not list. What about her?" He gestured to a Klindran woman with piercing eyes and an air of authority. "Minister Kayla," Lyra said, her tone uncertain. She was responsible for negotiating treaties with other systems. But she's pragmatic. Some say too much. "Pragmatic enough to sell you out?" Jax asked. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at Kayla's image, her expression troubled. "I don't know. She always said she'd do whatever it took to ensure Klindra's survival. But I never thought she'd." Jax leaned back, crossing his arms. "Sometimes whatever it takes means crossing lines. Keep an eye on her." Their discussion was interrupted by a sudden blip on the scanner. Lyra jumped to her feet, rushing to the cockpit. Jax followed close behind, his hand instinctively resting on his blaster. "What is it?" he asked. Lyra squinted at the screen. "A ship. Small. Unarmed. It's broadcasting a distress signal." Jax frowned. "That's convenient. Too convenient." Lyra hesitated, torn. "What if it's real? We can't just leave them. And what if it's a trap?" Jax countered. "We're not exactly swimming in luck right now." The signal grew stronger, and a faint voice came through the comms. "This is Transport Vessel Epsilon requesting assistance. Engines failed. Life support critical. Please help." Lyra's expression softened. "We can't ignore them. If it were my people." Jax sighed. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." The Starhawk approached the stranded vessel cautiously, its weapons ready but silent. The ship was a battered transport, its hull pockmarked with age and damage. Jax scanned for any signs of danger, but found nothing unusual. "I still don't like this," he muttered as they docked. Lyra ignored him, already heading for the airlock. Jax followed, his blaster drawn. As the airlock doors hissed open, a single figure emerged. A young human man, thin and pale, his face lined with desperation. "Thank you," the man said, his voice shaking. "I thought I was going to die out here." Lyra stepped forward. "Who are you? What happened to your ship?" The man looked at her, his eyes wide. "I'm a trader. My engines failed after a meteor shower. I've been drifting for days." Jax narrowed his eyes, scanning the man for weapons or signs of deceit. Something about his story didn't sit right. "Let me see your logs," Jax said, his tone firm. The man hesitated, his hands trembling. I don't have them. The system was damaged in the storm." Jax exchanged a glance with Lyra. "Convenient, isn't it?" Before Lyra could respond, the man lunged. His hands moved faster than Jax expected, pulling a small device from his belt and slamming it against the airlock controls. The door slammed shut, and a loud clunk echoed through the ship. "What did you do?" Lyra demanded, her dagger flashing in her hand. The man smirked, his fear gone. "You've been marked. The Syndicate will find you now, no matter where you go." Jax didn't hesitate. He grabbed the man by the collar and shoved him against the wall. "Who sent you?" The man laughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "It doesn't matter. You're already dead." Lyra's dagger pressed against his throat, her voice icy. "We'll see about that." The Starhawk shook violently as an alert blared across the cockpit. Jax released the man and bolted for the controls. The scanner lit up with red dots. "Syndicate ships." "They're here," Jax said grimly. Lyra's voice was steady but cold. "Then we fight." Jax smirked despite the danger. "Now you're talking my language." As the Starhawk powered up its weapons, Jax couldn't shake the nagging thought that this wasn't just about survival anymore. Someone close to Lyra had sold them out, and whoever it was, they were going to pay. Destiny's twist. The Starhawk burst into open space, its engines screaming as Jax pushed them to their limit. Behind them, Syndicate ships swarmed like a pack of wolves, their lasers streaking through the void. Every hit against the Starhawk's shields sent a shudder through the cockpit, and every second felt like an eternity. "Shields at 20%. Lyra shouted, her hands moving quickly across the weapons console. "We won't last much longer." Jax gritted his teeth, weaving the ship through the debris field of an ancient battle. "We just need to hold out until we reach Nova Prime's jurisdiction. Their defense grid will stop these guys cold. Assuming we survive that long." Lyra shot back, launching a pair of missiles at their pursuers. One of the Syndicate ships exploded, but the rest pressed on, undeterred. Jax's fingers danced over the controls as he activated the comms. "Nova Prime Defense, this is Captain Jax of the Starhawk. We're under attack by Syndicate forces and carrying a high-priority passenger, requesting immediate assistance." Static crackled through the speakers, followed by a calm, authoritative voice. "Starhawk, this is Nova Prime Defense. You are cleared for approach. Hold course. Reinforcements en route." "Finally, some good news," Jax muttered, jerking the ship hard to the left to avoid a direct hit. The shining planet of Nova Prime grew larger on the viewport, its orbit surrounded by the faint glimmer of its massive defense grid. Syndicate ships hesitated as they approached, wary of crossing into protected space. "Looks like they're backing off," Jax said, exhaling in relief. Lyra wasn't convinced. No, they wouldn't give up this easily. Her words proved prophetic. The Syndicate ships pulled back, but not far. They hovered just outside Nova Prime's jurisdiction, waiting like vultures. Jax frowned. They're not running. They're planning something. Before he could ponder further, a small Nova Prime escort ship approached the Starhawk, signaling for them to dock. "Guess this is it," Jax said, guiding the ship in. Inside Nova Prime's sleek, metallic docking bay, Jax and Lyra were met by a delegation of armed guards and an official-looking woman in pristine white robes. Her sharp gaze lingered on Lyra. "Princess Lyra," the woman said, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Nova Prime. I am Minister Selen, your appointed liaison." Lyra inclined her head but didn't smile. "Thank you, Minister. I trust the High Council is ready to hear my case." Celine hesitated, her smile faltering. Of course. However, there is a complication. The council has requested a closed session. Only you may attend. Jack stepped forward, his blaster still strapped to his side. Wait a second. She's not going anywhere alone. Not after everything we've been through. Celine's expression hardened. This is a matter of diplomacy, Captain. Your presence is unnecessary. Lyra raised a hand to silence Jax. It's fine. I'll go. She turned to Jax, her voice softer. Stay here. I'll handle this. Jax didn't like it, but he nodded. Be careful. The council chamber was grand and imposing, its high ceilings and marble floors echoing with Lyra's every step. At the center of the room sat the High Council, a circle of 5 beings from various species, their faces cold and unreadable. Lyra stood tall, her voice steadied as she began to speak. She detailed the Syndicate's crimes, the destruction of her world, and her plea for the council to intervene. When she finished, silence filled the chamber. Then one of the council members, a tall, reptilian being, spoke. Your story is compelling, Princess Lyra. But do you have proof? Lyra's jaw tightened. The Syndicate has pursued me across the galaxy. Is that not proof enough? Another council member, a pale human man, leaned forward. Claims without evidence are dangerous, Princess. Do you have corroboration from your allies? Lyra hesitated. She had no hard evidence, only her word, and someone among her allies was a traitor. The human counselor's lips curved into a thin smile. Then, I'm afraid, your request is denied. Lyra's heart sank. You can't. Millions of lives are at stake. The counselor stood, his expression cold. The council cannot act on baseless accusations. This session is adjourned. As Lyra was escorted back to the docking bay, her mind raced. Someone had influenced the council. The human counselor's dismissal was too convenient, too practiced. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was tied to the Syndicate. When she rejoined Jax, her frustration was palpable. They refused to act. The council is compromised. Jax frowned. What do you mean, compromised? One of them is working with the Syndicate. Lyra said, her voice sharp. I'm sure of it. The human counselor, he knew too much. Jax's eyes narrowed. So what do we do now? Call it quits. Lyra's expression hardened. No, we expose them. Jax and Lyra worked quickly, hacking into Nova Prime's secure databases from the Starhawk. Lyra's knowledge of political networks and Jax's knack for breaking into restricted systems made them a formidable team. What are we looking for? Jax asked, his fingers flying across the console. Anything that ties the counselor to the Syndicate, Lyra replied. After what felt like hours, Jax hit the jackpot. Got it. A private communication log between the counselor and a Syndicate commander. He's been funneling them information and blocking aid requests from survivors like you. Lyra's eyes burned with determination. This is the proof we need. Armed with the evidence, Lyra stormed back into the council chamber, flanked by Jax and a Nova Prime security team. The counselors looked up in surprise as Lyra slammed the datapad onto the central table. This is what you refused to see, she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. One of your own has betrayed you. The human counselor's face paled as the logs were displayed for all to see. The other counselors murmured among themselves, their shock evident. The reptilian counselor rose, his voice booming. Counselor Merrick, you are hereby stripped of your position and placed under arrest. As Merrick was dragged away, Lyra turned to the remaining counselors. Now will you act? The reptilian counselor nodded solemnly. You have our full support, Princess Lyra. The Syndicate will answer for their crimes. Back on the Starhawk, Jax leaned against the wall, watching as Lyra prepared for the next step of her journey. So, he said, smirking, guess that makes you an official badass. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. And you're not so useless for a human. Jax chuckled. High praise coming from you. As the Starhawk lifted off, leaving Nova Prime behind, Lyra glanced at Jax. "We still have a long fight ahead." Jax grinned. "Good. I'd hate for things to get boring." The stars stretched out before them, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt something she thought she'd lost forever: hope.